Captain Eva Rostova felt the eyes on her the moment she walked into the briefing room at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. It wasn't the usual curiosity for a new transfer. This was different. It was a cold, appraising silence that felt heavier than the Arizona heat outside. She was the only woman in a room of A-10 Thunderbolt II pilots, a club more exclusive and rugged than most. Eva, callsign Valkyrie, was used to being the only woman. She wasn't used to feeling like an unwelcome guest in her own house. She found an empty seat in the back, her flight suit crisp, her posture straight as a rod. She was not a large woman, but she carried herself with an unshakable confidence that came from thousands of hours in the air and a will forged in steel. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight regulation bun, and her sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing. At the front of the room, Colonel Mitchell cleared his throat. He was a man carved from granite, with a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts, and a pair of pale blue eyes that seemed to be permanently narrowed in disapproval. He was old. School, a pilot from a different era, and his reputation preceded him. He saw the world in black and white, right and wrong, strong and weak, men and women. "All right, settle down," he grunted, his voice like gravel. He went through the day's schedules, his tone flat and clipped. Finally, his eyes landed on Eva. "We have a new pilot joining the 355th Wing, Captain Rostova." He didn't say her call sign. It was a small thing, a subtle jab, but in the world of fighter pilots, your call sign was your identity. To ignore it was to ignore her place among them. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. "Rostova," the colonel continued, "you'll be taking over the Pig. Hangar 4. Master Sergeant Miller is your crew chief. Get her acquainted." A low murmur went through the room. The Pig was a legend for all the wrong reasons. It was the oldest A-10 on the base, a patchwork of repaired parts and faded paint. It was a plane that seemed to have a personal grudge against staying in the air. Every pilot had a story about something failing on that jet. To assign it to a new transfer, especially the only female one, was not a welcome. It was a message. Eva's face remained a perfect mask of calm. She simply nodded. "Yes, sir." After the briefing, as the other pilots filed out, a few offered her quiet, sympathetic looks. No one stopped to talk. She was an outsider, and the colonel had just drawn a circle around her. She found Hangar 4 easily. The massive metal doors were rolled open, and inside, sitting under the dim lights, was the A-10. It looked tired. The gray paint was chipped and scarred, revealing the metal underneath. Patches of new paint stood out like fresh bruises. It squatted on its landing gear, looking less like the fearsome warthog it was nicknamed, and more like a weary old boar ready to be put out to pasture. A man in his late 50s, with a grease-stained uniform and a kind, wrinkled face, was running a hand along the fuselage. He looked up as Eva approached. "You must be Captain Rostova," he said, wiping his hand on a rag. His voice was warm, a stark contrast to the colonel's icy tone. "I'm Master Sergeant Frank Miller. Everyone just calls me Sarge." "Good to meet you, Sarge," Eva said, her eyes fixed on the plane. "So this is her." Sarge sighed. "Yep, this is old number 790145, the Pig. She ain't pretty, but her guns work just as good as any other." He patted the plane's massive 7-barrel Gatling gun, the heart and soul of the A-10. "Colonel's got you in this bird, huh?" Eva met his gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a shared understanding. "Looks that way." "Don't you mind him, Captain," Sarge said, his voice dropping a little. "He's been sour since they started letting women fly combat. Thinks it's a man's world. But a plane doesn't know if you're a man or a woman. It just knows if you're a pilot. You show him what you can do, and the rest will fall in line." Over the next few weeks, Eva learned that Sarge's words were easier said than done. Colonel Mitchell seemed to have made it his personal mission to test her, to break her. He assigned her the worst flight schedules: early morning patrols over empty desert, late-night readiness drills. During training exercises, he was relentless on the radio, criticizing her every move, questioning her judgment. "Valkyrie, your angle of attack is sloppy. Tighten it up," he'd bark, for all the other pilots to hear. "Valkyrie, you were 2 seconds late on that target. In a real fight, that gets people killed." Eva never talked back. She never made excuses. She just flew, and she flew brilliantly. Her control of the A-10 was flawless. She was poetry in the sky, making the heavy, powerful jet dance in ways that made the younger pilots watch in awe. She was always on target, always precise. She answered every bit of his criticism with cold, hard skill, but it didn't seem to matter. In the colonel's eyes, she was a liability, a box-ticking exercise in diversity that had been forced upon his wing. Her only friend was Sarge. They spent hours together in the hangar, working on the Pig. Sarge Miller knew that plane better than he knew his own children. He and Eva developed a quiet bond, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared love for the old, beat-up jet. Sarge saw her dedication, the hours she spent studying the manuals, her insistence on checking every wire and every bolt herself. "This hydraulic line is weeping again, Sarge," she'd say, pointing to a faint, damp spot. "I know, Captain," he'd reply, shaking his head. "I've put in a request for a replacement part 3 times. The colonel keeps denying it, says it's within acceptable limits." It was another one of Mitchell's games. By starving her plane of new parts, he was increasing the risk, putting her in more danger every time she flew. He was building a case against her. When something finally went wrong, he could blame her, not the aging aircraft or his own neglect. He was setting her up to fail. Eva knew it. Sarge knew it. But there was nothing they could do. All she could do was fly and trust that the old warthog and the man who cared for it would bring her home. One afternoon, a training mission was scheduled. A complex ground support exercise with live ammunition. Eva was in the air, the Pig feeling unusually sluggish. As she lined up for her first gun run, a warning light flashed on her console. "Engine fluctuation. Valkyrie to tower. I've got a caution light on my starboard engine. Running rough," she reported, her voice steady. Colonel Mitchell's voice came back over the radio instantly, dripping with satisfaction. "See? This is what I'm talking about. Abort your run, Valkyrie. Return to base. Immediately." He was making it sound like her fault, as if her flying had caused the mechanical issue. Eva gritted her teeth. "Roger that, tower. Returning to base." She landed the plane safely, but the damage was done. In the debriefing, Mitchell didn't hold back. He spoke to the entire group of pilots as if Eva wasn't even there. "Some pilots can handle the stress of this aircraft and some can't," he said, his eyes boring into her. "This jet requires a firm hand. It's not a toy. If you can't handle the pressure, you are a danger to yourself and to everyone around you." The room was silent. Eva stood there, her face unreadable, her heart pounding with a cold, controlled anger. She had done everything right. She had followed procedure, landed a malfunctioning aircraft safely, and for that, she was being publicly shamed. She was being blamed for a failing part that her commander had refused to replace. That evening, she found Sarge in the hangar, looking grim. "He's going to ground you, Captain," Sarge said quietly. "I heard him talking. He's building a file. He's going to use this engine fault as proof that you're not fit to fly." Eva looked at the old plane, her plane. She had poured her heart and soul into mastering it, into keeping it safe. And now the man in charge was trying to take it all away. From her, not because of her skill, but because of his own prejudice. She placed a hand on the Pig's cold metal skin. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's not." A fire had been lit inside her. It was no longer just about being a pilot. It was about justice. She wouldn't let him win. She would fly this plane, and she would prove to him and to everyone else what she was made of. She just needed a chance. She had no idea that her chance was coming, and that it would cost her more than she could ever imagine. The incident with the engine should have been the final nail in the coffin for Captain Rostova's career at the 355th Wing. Colonel Mitchell made sure of it. He filed a formal report, carefully worded to imply pilot error. He spoke of over-aggressive handling and a failure to respond to subtle aircraft feedback. To anyone who didn't know the full story, it looked damning. Ava was grounded, pending a full review. For 2 weeks, she was relegated to a desk, pushing papers while the other pilots flew. The humiliation was a heavy cloak she wore every day. The men she had flown with now avoided her eyes, caught between their respect for her skill and their fear of the colonel. Mitchell, meanwhile, seemed to take pleasure in her punishment. He would walk past her desk, a smug little smile playing on his lips, as if to say, "I told you so." But he had underestimated Ava Rostova. She wasn't the type to break. She was the type to dig in. And he had underestimated Master Sergeant Frank Miller. Sarge had been at this base for 30 years. He had seen commanders come and go. He knew the difference between a good leader and a bully. Late one night, long after the base had gone quiet, Sarge met Eva in the deserted hangar. The pig sat in the shadows, a silent monument to their shared problem. "I pulled the maintenance logs, Captain," Sarge said, holding out a thin file. "Not just for our bird, but for the whole wing. And I found something." He opened the file on the wing of the A-10. Inside were printouts of parts requests and maintenance schedules. "Look here," Sarge said, pointing to a date from 6 months ago. Colonel Mitchell signed off on a fleet-wide cost-saving initiative. He canceled scheduled replacements for dozens of parts, hydraulic pumps, engine turbines, you name it. He deemed them non-essential until the next major service interval. "The part that failed on you? It was on that list." Eva's eyes scanned the documents. It was all there, in black and white. Mitchell wasn't just targeting her. He was cutting corners across the entire wing to make his budget look good, to make himself look good for his next promotion. He was putting every single pilot at risk. Her incident wasn't a random failure. It was an inevitability. He had grounded her not just to get rid of her, but to cover his own tracks. If he could prove she was a bad pilot, then the mechanical failure was her fault, not his. "This is more than just a grudge," Ava said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is criminal negligence." "That's right." Sarge nodded grimly. "But it's his signature against our word. He'll bury us in paperwork. He'll say we have an axe to grind." "So what do we do?" Eva asked. "We fight back," Sarge said, a determined glint in his eye. Quietly. "I'm going to start replacing these parts myself. I've got friends at other bases, old favors I can call in. I can get what we need, off the books. We're going to make this plane the safest A-10 in the sky. And you," he looked at her, "you need to get back in that cockpit. You need to be so good that he can't ignore you. You need to be ready for when the time comes." The review board was a panel of 3 officers, 2 of whom were friends of Colonel Mitchell. He presented his case with cool authority. He showed them the flight data, twisted to support his narrative. He spoke of his duty to ensure the safety of his pilots. When it was Ava's turn, she didn't make accusations. She didn't mention the canceled parts. She knew it wasn't the time. Instead, she presented her own flight record, a perfect history. Commendations from every previous commander. She calmly and methodically walked them through the moments leading up to the engine failure, explaining every decision she made, referencing the emergency procedures in the flight manual verbatim. She was so precise, so professional, that to deny her was to deny the Air Force's own rulebook. Reluctantly, the board had no choice. They cleared her of any wrongdoing. She was reinstated to flight duty. The look on Colonel Mitchell's face when he heard the verdict was one of pure, unadulterated fury. He had lost the battle, but Ava knew the war was far from over. He couldn't ground her, so he tried to bury her. He gave her every miserable flight he could think of. Long, grueling patrol routes over the featureless desert, missions that were designed to be as boring and spirit-crushing as possible. He was trying to make her quit, but for Eva, every hour in the cockpit of the pig was a victory. She and Sarge had a secret. While the colonel thought he was punishing her with a broken-down jet, they were slowly, piece by piece, rebuilding it. After her flights, she wouldn't go home. She'd change into a set of old coveralls and work alongside Sarge in the hangar. He taught her the guts of the machine she flew, the intricate web of wires and hydraulics that kept her alive in the sky. She learned how to patch a fuel line, how to recalibrate the targeting computer, how to read the subtle signs of stress on the airframe. Their hands were constantly stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. The hangar became their sanctuary. The pig, once a symbol of her punishment, was becoming a symbol of her defiance. They were pouring their own sweat and integrity into its metal skin. The other pilots started to notice. They saw the lights on in Hangar 4 late at night. They saw the change in the pig. The engine no longer sputtered on startup. The electronics didn't flicker anymore. Captain Rostova was flying more than any of them, on the worst assignments in the oldest jet, and she never had a single complaint. She was just quiet, focused, and better than ever. Respect, a fragile and precious currency on a military base, began to shift. The whispers in the hallways changed. The other pilots started giving her nods of acknowledgement. They would ask her questions about the A-10, seeking her advice. They knew she was flying a plane that Mitchell was neglecting, and they knew she was handling it with a skill that none of them could deny. Mitchell saw the change too, and it ate at him. His authority was being subtly undermined, not by insubordination, but by quiet competence. The more he tried to push her down, the higher she seemed to rise. His grudge was becoming an obsession. He needed to prove he was right. He needed to see her fail once and for all. He started looking for an opportunity, a mission that was too difficult, too dangerous, a mission that even the great Captain Valkyrie Rostova couldn't handle. He watched the intelligence reports from overseas, waiting for the right set of circumstances, the perfect storm. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to get his wish. And in his blind determination to ruin a good pilot's career, he was about to set the stage for a legend to be born. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. The air in the briefing room was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. On the main screen was a satellite map of a rugged, mountainous region in a forgotten corner of Afghanistan. Red circles marked enemy positions. And in the center of it all, a single blue icon blinking like a fragile heartbeat. "This is Operation Granite Shield," Colonel Mitchell began, his voice cold and grave. He pointed to the blue icon. A long-range reconnaissance team, call sign Pathfinder, was compromised an hour ago. "They are pinned down on this ridge, taking heavy fire, and they have wounded." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "The weather is closing in fast. A storm front is moving through the valley. We have one window to provide close air support and clear a path for a rescue chopper. One. Every other asset in the region is tied up. That leaves us." His eyes swept the room, and for the first time, he didn't seem to be looking at Ava. He was looking at all his pilots. This was real. This wasn't a drill. "This is a high-threat environment," Mitchell continued. "The enemy is well entrenched with heavy machine guns and reports of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. It's a job for the A-10. We need to go in low and fast, hit them hard, and get out before that storm slams the door shut." A young pilot, a lieutenant named Davis, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the window?" "The storm will make the valley impassable in 90 minutes, Mitchell said. "That gives the rescue chopper just enough time to get in and out if, and only if, the landing zone is clear. Whoever takes this mission is the linchpin. If they fail, the Pathfinders don't make it home." The room was silent. Every pilot knew what he was asking. It was a textbook danger-close mission, flying low in treacherous mountain terrain with a storm bearing down against an enemy that could shoot back. It was the kind of mission that made heroes or made widows. Mitchell's eyes finally settled on Eva. His expression was unreadable. This was it. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. A mission so dangerous that failure was a distinct possibility. A mission he could, in good conscience, assign to the next pilot in the rotation. And the next pilot in the rotation was Captain Eva Rostova. "Valkyrie," he said, the name sounding foreign in his mouth. "You're up." A few of the other pilots glanced at her, their faces etched with concern. They knew her skill, but they also knew about the pig. This was not a mission for a plane with a history of mechanical problems. Eva didn't flinch. She simply looked at the map, her mind already calculating fuel consumption, ordnance load, and flight paths. This wasn't about the colonel anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about the soldiers trapped on that mountain. I'll need a full ordnance load, she said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the tension in the room. High explosive and incendiary. And I want the Gatling gun loaded with combat mix. Sarge will know what I mean. Mitchell gave a curt nod. Your plane is being armed now. Pre-flight in 30 minutes. Don't be late. As she walked out of the briefing room, she could feel his eyes on her back. He had given her the mission, but there was no confidence in his gaze. No good luck. There was only a cold, hard expectation of failure. In the hangar, Sarge and his crew were moving with a focused intensity. The pig was being transformed. Bombs and missiles were being loaded onto the hardpoints under its wings. The ammunition drum for the GAU-8 Avenger cannon was being filled with 30mm shells the size of milk bottles. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone. Sarge met her by the cockpit ladder. He held out her helmet, his face grim. I checked everything, Captain, he said, his voice low. Twice. Every part we replaced, I put a wrench on it myself. The engines are running sweet. She's ready. I know she is, Sarge, Eva said, taking the helmet. You and I, we made her ready. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a paternal worry that went beyond the duties of a crew chief. You be careful up there, you hear me? This is a nasty one. Don't you go taking any unnecessary risks for anyone, especially not to prove a point to him. The only point I'm proving today, Sarge, is that we don't leave our people behind, she replied. She gave him a small, rare smile. Don't worry. The pig and I will be back for dinner. She climbed into the cockpit, the familiar seat embracing her. She went through her pre-flight checks, her hands moving with practiced ease over the switches and dials. She could hear the ground crew outside, their voices muffled through her helmet. Then the canopy slid shut, sealing her in her own world. She fired up the twin engines, and the old Warthog roared to life. This time there was no sputter, no hesitation. The engines whined with a power that felt new, clean. She taxied onto the runway, the desert landscape stretching out before her. Over the radio, she heard the tower clear her for takeoff. Then another voice cut in. It was Colonel Mitchell. Valkyrie, he said, his voice a cold rasp in her ears. You know what's at stake. Try not to scratch the paint. It was his final jab, a last-ditch effort to get under her skin. But Eva didn't hear the insult. She didn't hear the grudge. All she heard was the roar of her engines and the sound of her own steady breathing. She pushed the throttles forward. The pig, laden with a full load of fuel and weapons, surged down the runway. It felt heavy but strong. It felt alive. With a final pull on the stick, she lifted off the ground, the Arizona desert falling away beneath her. She was climbing into the deep blue sky, a lone warrior in a battle-worn jet, flying towards a storm on the other side of the world. She was flying towards a mountain where a team of soldiers was counting on her, and her alone, to be their salvation. The flight to the target area was a race against time. Eva pushed the pig harder than she ever had before. Below her, the rugged terrain of Afghanistan unfolded like a crumpled brown map. The sky ahead was turning a bruised purple-gray, the leading edge of the storm front Mitchell had warned her about. She had to get in, do her job, and get out before that weather slammed the door. Her radio crackled. Valkyrie, this is Pathfinder Actual. Do you read me? The voice was young, strained, and punctuated by the sound of distant gunfire. Pathfinder, this is Valkyrie. I read you loud and clear, Eva responded, her voice a calm reassurance in the chaos. I am 5 minutes out. Talk to me. What's your situation? We're in a bad way, Valkyrie, the voice on the ground said. We've got enemy positions dug in on the slopes above us. Pinned down. We can't move. We have 2 men seriously wounded. They're hitting us with everything they've got. Roger that, Pathfinder. I see you on my screen, Eva said, her eyes locked on the targeting pod display. I'm coming in from the south. Mark your position with smoke. A moment later, a plume of purple smoke began to rise from the ridge line. It was dangerously close to the flashes of light that she knew were enemy muzzle flashes. I have you, Pathfinder, she said. I'm starting my run. Keep your heads down. She rolled the A-10 onto its side, the ground tilting crazily in her view. The mountains rushed up to meet her. She was flying low, using the terrain to mask her approach. This was what the A-10 was built for. This was her element. First target is a machine gun nest, 200 meters north of your smoke, she said, her thumb hovering over the weapon's release button. Engaging now, she squeezed the trigger. A Maverick missile dropped from the wing, streaking towards the mountainside. A heartbeat later, a ball of fire and rock erupted from the slope. "Good hit! Good hit!" the voice from the ground yelled over the radio. "That nest is gone!" But there were more. Ava pulled the plane up in a steep climb, twisting to avoid the rocky peaks. She could see tracers now, green lines of light reaching up for her. They were shooting at her. "They know you're here, Valkyrie," Pathfinder warned. "Watch yourself." "That's the idea," Eva said calmly. She rolled back in for another pass, this time from a different angle. Her target was a group of enemy fighters using a rock outcropping for cover. This was a job for the gun. She lined up the shot and squeezed the trigger on her control stick. The entire aircraft shuddered as the GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened up. A deafening roar filled the cockpit, a sound that pilots called the devil's fart. A torrent of 30mm shells, fired at a rate of 70 rounds per second, ripped into the mountainside. The rock outcropping, and everyone behind it, disintegrated into dust and splinters. For the next 10 minutes, Eva became a fearsome angel of death. She and the pig moved as one. She was relentless, precise, and devastatingly effective. She took out a mortar position, silenced another machine gun, and scattered a group of fighters who were trying to flank the trapped soldiers. The gunfire from the enemy positions began to slacken. She was breaking them. "Valkyrie, you're a lifesaver," the Pathfinder leader said, his voice filled with awe and relief. "The pressure's off. I think we can hold now. The rescue chopper has a window." "Roger that, Pathfinder." "Glad I could help," Eva said, a surge of pride running through her. This was why she flew. "I'm making one more pass to check the area, and then I'm heading home." She was pulling up, banking towards the south, when a warning tone blared in her headset. A high-pitched, insistent squeal. "Missile lock." Her head snapped around. She saw it. A plume of smoke, rising fast from a hidden position on the valley floor. A shoulder-fired missile, a lucky shot from a position she hadn't seen. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" she yelled into the radio, more for her own benefit than anyone else's. Her training took over. She slammed the stick to the side, pulling the A-10 into a gut-wrenching turn. She punched the button to release flares, bright balls of magnesium designed to fool the missile's heat-seeking guidance system. The sky behind her filled with brilliant white light. For a terrifying second, she thought it had worked. Then came the impact. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a violent, jarring punch that threw her against her straps. The world outside her cockpit became a blur of spinning sky and earth. Alarms screamed in her ears. The cockpit filled with the acrid smell of burning electronics. The missile had hit her right engine. The force of the blast had torn most of it away from the wing. The plane was in an uncontrolled spin, plummeting towards the rocky ground. With a surge of adrenaline, she fought the controls. She pushed the rudder pedals, fighting the spin. The plane was barely responding. The controls felt sluggish, disconnected. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she shouted into her radio. "Valkyrie is hit! I am hit! I'm going down!" She could see the ground rushing up to meet her. This was it. This was how it ended. But then, something inside her, that core of pure steel, refused to give up. "Not today," she whispered through gritted teeth. She focused on her instruments. Airspeed dropping, altitude unwinding like a broken clock. She put all her strength into the controls, and slowly, miraculously, the spin began to slow. The plane was still falling, but it was flying again. Sort of. The right engine was gone, a mangled wreck of twisted metal. The left engine was still running, but it was straining. The wing was shredded, full of holes. Her radio was dead, only static hissed in her ears. The final blow came when a piece of shrapnel from the engine explosion shot forward, shattering a large section of her armored cockpit canopy. The wind roared into the cockpit, a deafening blast of cold air that stole her breath. She was flying a crippled, dying machine with no radio, a hole in her canopy, and deep inside enemy territory. On the ground, the Pathfinder team had watched in horror as the A-10 was hit. They saw the explosion, the spin, the terrifying dive. They heard her final, garbled mayday call before it cut to static. They saw her disappear behind a ridge. There was no fireball, no secondary explosion. Just silence. Did she make it? One of the soldiers asked. The team leader stared at the empty sky, his heart sinking. Nobody makes it from a hit like that, he said quietly. Nobody. Back at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, the operations room was a tomb. Time seemed to have stopped. Everyone was staring at the large tactical screen where Captain Rostova's icon had been just moments before. Now there was nothing. Her signal had simply vanished. The last thing they had heard was her Mayday call, cut short by a burst of static. They had heard the Pathfinder team's report. A missile hit, a catastrophic explosion, a plane in an uncontrollable spin. Colonel Mitchell stood in the center of the room, his face a grim, unreadable mask. Inside, however, a storm of conflicting emotions was raging. A part of him felt a cold, vindicating satisfaction. He had been right. She couldn't handle the pressure. She had failed. But another, smaller part of him felt a twinge of something he didn't want to acknowledge. Guilt. He had sent her on this mission, in that plane, hoping she would fail. He had never imagined this. The radio operator turned to him, his face pale. "Sir," Pathfinder confirms. "They saw the hit. The aircraft went down behind a ridge. No chute, no beacon. What about a search and rescue mission?" A young captain asked, his voice full of hope. Mitchell's eyes hardened. This was the moment he had to take control, to reassert his authority. He had to manage the narrative. "Negative," Mitchell said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The area is too hot. The enemy knows they shot down one of our planes. They'll be swarming that crash site, and that storm front is moving in faster than predicted. To send a rescue team in now would be suicide. We can't risk more lives on a maybe." "But, sir," the captain persisted, "she could be alive down there." She took a direct hit from a surface-to-air missile. "Captain," Mitchell snapped, his voice sharp as broken glass. Her plane went into a terminal spin. "There is no alive down there. Captain Rostova is gone." He said the words with a finality that sucked the air out of the room. It was an order. There would be no rescue. The case was closed. "I am officially declaring her killed in action," Mitchell announced. "Inform the rescue chopper to stand down. Their priority now is getting the Pathfinder team out of there before the storm hits." In the hangar, Sarge Miller heard the news over the maintenance crew's radio network. He felt the words like a physical blow. He dropped the wrench he was holding, the clang of metal on concrete echoing the sound of his heart breaking. "No," he whispered to the empty hangar. Not her. Not like that. He had known it was a dangerous mission, but he had trusted her skill. And he had trusted their work on the plane. He had believed that the pig, the plane they had poured their souls into, would bring her home. He sank onto a nearby toolbox, his head in his hands. He knew Colonel Mitchell. He knew about his grudge, and a dark, terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. Mitchell had declared her dead too quickly. He had called off the search too eagerly. It felt wrong. It felt like he was sweeping a problem under the rug. Sarge stood up and walked over to the flight scheduling board. He looked at the rotation. He looked at the maintenance records he knew were fake. He looked at the history of neglect. And he saw it all clearly. Mitchell hadn't just sent her on a dangerous mission. He had sent her to her grave. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Pathfinder team was being lifted out by a Black Hawk helicopter. As they ascended, the team leader looked down at the rugged, unforgiving mountains where the A-10 had gone down. The storm was rolling in now, thick clouds boiling over the peaks. There was no smoke, no sign of a crash. The mountain had swallowed her whole. He felt a profound sense of debt to the pilot who had saved his life and a bitter anger at the commander who had refused to even look for her. Back at the base, the official process of death began. Mitchell ordered the base chaplain to prepare to notify Eva's next of kin. He scheduled a memorial service. He was moving fast, cementing the story, making it official, irreversible reality. Captain Eva Valkyrie Rostova was a hero who had made the ultimate sacrifice. He would praise her in public, while privately feeling the relief of a problem solved. The other pilots were in a state of shock. They gathered in the rec room, speaking in hushed tones. They respected Valkyrie. They had seen her fly. They knew how good she was. But a missile was a missile. No one could survive that. They accepted the colonel's judgment because the alternative was too painful to consider. That night, Colonel Mitchell sat alone in his office. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand steady. He had won. Rostova was gone. The questions about the maintenance failures would be buried with her. His career was safe. He raised his glass in a silent, solitary toast. He thought of her last transmission, the garbled Mayday call. He thought of the blinking icon on the screen and how it had simply disappeared. He told himself it was the cost of war. It was a tragedy, but it was over. He was wrong. It wasn't over. Miles away, in the dark, wind-swept mountains of a hostile country, a lone figure was fighting for her life. She was cold, she was bleeding, and she was surrounded by enemies. But she was not dead, and she was not done fighting. Colonel Mitchell believed he had erased her from the board. He had no idea that she was about to crawl back from the grave, bringing a storm of her own with her. He had said they'd never see her again. He had made a terrible miscalculation. The wind howled through the shattered canopy, a physical force that tried to rip the helmet from Eva's head. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she fought to keep the crippled A-10 level. The stick felt like it was set in concrete. The plane wanted to die. It wanted to roll over and plunge into the rocks below. Ava wouldn't let it. She had managed to pull out of the dive just a few hundred feet above the valley floor. Her vision had gone gray from the G-forces, but her training and sheer stubbornness had won out. She was flying. Barely. The right engine was gone, a useless, heavy drag on the wing. The left engine was screaming in protest, running far beyond its limits to compensate. The plane was shuddering violently, the airframe groaning under the impossible strain. She was losing hydraulic pressure, which meant her controls were getting heavier by the second. Her first instinct was to eject. That was the procedure. Unrecoverable aircraft, hostile territory, punch out and wait for rescue. But her radio was dead. No one had heard her mayday, and as she looked at the unforgiving landscape below, she knew a pilot on the ground wouldn't last long. And then there was Colonel Mitchell. The thought of him sitting in his comfortable office, writing her off, filled her with a cold, hard rage. If she ejected, he would be right. She would just be another casualty, another file to close. Her story would end here, a footnote in his perfect career. "No," she said aloud, her voice snatched away by the wind. "Not on his terms. On mine." She looked at her plane, at the pig. It was torn apart, bleeding fluid, but it was still in the air. This old, neglected jet, the one they had all dismissed, was refusing to die. She and Sarge had poured their hearts into this machine. It had a fighting spirit, just like her. "Okay, old girl," she whispered, patting the dashboard. "It's just you and me. Let's go home." Home was hundreds of miles away across mountains, deserts, and enemy lines. She had no radio, no navigation computer, and half an airplane. It was impossible. But Ava Rostova had never been one to back down from the impossible. Her first challenge was the storm. The same storm that Mitchell had used as an excuse not to look for her was now her only ally. She flew straight into the churning gray clouds. The turbulence was horrific. The A-10 was thrown around like a leaf in a hurricane. But inside the storm, she was invisible. No one on the ground could see her. No enemy fighters could find her. She used the violent weather as a shield. She was bleeding. A piece of shrapnel had torn through her flight suit, leaving a deep gash in her left arm. The cold air blasting through the canopy was making her shiver uncontrollably. Pain was a constant, throbbing companion. But she pushed it down. She had to focus. With her main navigation systems out, she had to rely on the basics. A simple magnetic compass, her watch, and the sun, when she could see it. She knew the general direction of her home base, east, so she flew east. As she cleared the storm, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it was a cruel joke. She was flying on fumes. Her fuel gauge was unreliable, but she knew she was running low. The A-10 was a thirsty beast, and with only one engine working overtime, it was drinking fuel at an alarming rate. She had to conserve every drop. She found a level altitude where the engine seemed most efficient and held it there. She flew in long, straight lines, avoiding any unnecessary maneuvers. It was a slow, agonizing crawl across the sky. Night fell. The world below became a black, empty void. Above her, the stars came out, a brilliant glittering canopy. She had studied celestial navigation at the academy, something most modern pilots considered a useless, outdated skill. Tonight, it was her lifeline. She found the North Star and used it to correct her course, a tiny speck of light guiding her home. She talked to the plane, her voice a low murmur in the roaring wind. "Come on, baby. Just a little further. Don't you quit on me now. We have to show them. We have to make it back." Her body was screaming for rest. Her eyelids felt like they were lined with lead. The pain in her arm was a searing fire. But she thought about Sarge and the quiet respect he had shown her. She thought about the soldiers on that mountain whose lives she had saved. And she thought about Colonel Mitchell's smug, dismissive face. Anger became her fuel. Determination was her co-pilot. Hours crawled by. Each minute was a victory. Each mile passed was a spit in the face of the man who had left her for dead. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, she saw it. A familiar shape, a mountain range she recognized. She was getting close. Her heart leaped with a desperate hope. But the plane was dying. The last of her hydraulic fluid was gone. The controls were almost completely frozen. The left engine began to sputter, starved of fuel. Warning lights that still worked were blinking like a Christmas tree. She was losing altitude, a slow, inevitable descent. The base was still miles away. She wasn't going to make it. She looked at the ejection handle again. It would be so easy. Just pull the handle and escape this metal coffin. But she couldn't. She had come this far. They had come this far, she and the pig. They would finish the journey together. She began to prepare for a crash landing in the desert. She tightened her straps, braced herself for impact. This was the end of the line. She had failed, and then, through the haze of exhaustion and pain, she saw it. A glint of light in the distance. A long, flat stretch of concrete. A runway. It was her base. A surge of adrenaline, stronger than any she had ever felt, shot through her. "You see that, girl?" she yelled over the wind. "We're home!" The plane had other ideas. The engine gave one final choked cough and then died. The only sound now was the terrifying whistle of the wind over the wings. She was a glider. A very heavy, very damaged, very angry glider. She had one chance, one shot at the runway. She aimed the nose of the silent warthog at that strip of concrete, her entire being focused on that single goal. She was too low. The plane was dropping too fast. But she remembered a trick, a desperate maneuver for just this situation. She fought the controls, forcing the plane into a shallow S-turn to bleed off a little more speed without losing too much altitude. She was coming in hot and crooked, but she was going to make it. She was going to land this shredded, battle-torn wreck right on their doorstep. She was going to show them all. She was coming home. A cheer erupted from the assembled pilots and crew. It started as a few scattered claps and then grew into a roar of applause and shouts. They were cheering for the pilot who had done the impossible, for the woman who had walked out of her own memorial service. Sarge was the first to reach her. He gently pushed past the medics, his face a mess of tears and disbelief. "Captain," he said, his voice choked with emotion. We thought you were gone." Ava gave him a weak, tired smile. "Almost, Sarge, almost. But the pig." She wouldn't quit. "She brought me home." She looked past him at the mangled wreck of her plane, now covered in firefighting foam. It looked like a fallen animal, its last ounce of strength spent. A wave of gratitude and sorrow washed over her. Medics quickly moved in and placed her on a stretcher. As they carried her towards the waiting ambulance, the crowd parted for her like the sea. Every person she passed, from the youngest airman to the most senior pilot, looked at her with a new expression. Pure, unadulterated awe. They were looking at a living legend. Her eyes, however, were locked on one man. Colonel Mitchell was slowly descending the steps from the stage, his movements stiff, robotic. His face was ashen. The confident, arrogant commander was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had seen his own ghost. Their paths intersected near the ambulance. The medics paused. The entire base seemed to be holding its breath. "Colonel," Eva said, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. It was hoarse, cracked with exhaustion, but it was as steady as steel. Mitchell couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at a point somewhere over her shoulder. "Rostova," he managed to say. "You're alive." "No thanks to you," she said, the words hitting him like a physical slap. "You left me for dead. You didn't even look. The storm. The enemy threat. It was too risky," he stammered, reciting the excuses he had perfected over the past 3 days. "You declared me dead an hour after I was hit," Eva countered, her voice growing stronger. "You didn't wait for confirmation. You didn't wait for a beacon. You just wanted me gone. Because if I was dead, then no one would ever know that you've been cutting corners, denying maintenance requests, and putting every single one of your pilots at risk to make your budget look good." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarge Miller stepped forward, holding a file in his hand. "She's right, sir," Sarge said, his voice ringing with authority. "I have the records. The parts requests you denied, the maintenance schedules you canceled, the part that failed on her first engine emergency. It's right here." "You signed off on it!" Mitchell's head snapped up, his eyes darting between Eva on the stretcher and Sarge holding the file. He was trapped. The ghost he had tried to bury and the man he had underestimated were standing together, presenting a case he could not deny. His eyes scanned the faces of his pilots. He saw no support. He saw only contempt and disillusionment. The respect he had commanded through fear had evaporated in an instant. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. "She's not the only one who knows, Colonel." A group of soldiers in army fatigues pushed their way through the crowd. It was the Pathfinder team. Their leader, a young captain, stepped forward and rendered a sharp salute to Eva on the stretcher. "Captain Rostova," he said with deep respect. "On behalf of my men, thank you. You saved our lives?" Then he turned to Mitchell, his eyes blazing with fury. "We were there. We saw the whole thing. We requested a search and rescue. You denied it. You said she was gone and called it a confirmed loss before anyone could have possibly known. We filed a report. It was the final blow. The hero pilot, the veteran crew chief, and the soldiers she had saved. It was an insurmountable mountain of truth. The base commander, a 2-star general who had been rushed to the scene, stepped forward. He had heard enough. He looked at Mitchell with cold disgust. "Colonel," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you are relieved of your command, effective immediately. An investigation will begin this afternoon." Mitchell didn't say a word. He just stood there, a hollowed-out man, as 2 security officers moved to escort him away. His career was over. His reputation was in ashes. He had tried to destroy one good pilot, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. As they loaded Eva into the ambulance, she looked back one last time at the wreckage of her A-10, the pig, the plane they had all laughed at. It had become her chariot, her shield, and her sword. It had carried her through the fire and delivered her to justice. In the weeks that followed, the story of Captain Valkyrie Rostova and her battle-torn Warthog spread like wildfire through the Air Force. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her heroism. The investigation into Colonel Mitchell uncovered years of negligence and deceit, leading to sweeping changes in maintenance protocols. Eva recovered from her injuries and was cleared to fly again. When she walked into the briefing room for the first time, the pilots, old and new, all stood up. The new wing commander, a woman with a sharp smile and an impeccable record, shook her hand. "Welcome back, Valkyrie," she said. "We've got a new A-10 waiting for you. Top of the line," Eva smiled. "Thank you, ma'am. But if it's all the same to you, I'd like my old plane back." They couldn't make the pig airworthy again. It was too badly damaged, but they didn't scrap it. Instead, they restored it to the exact condition it was in when she landed it, shredded, broken, but defiant. They mounted it on a pedestal near the main gate of the base, a permanent monument to the pilot and the plane that refused to die. Sometimes, Eva would go and stand before it, running a hand over its scarred metal skin. She had arrived at this base an outsider, underestimated and alone. Now she was its guardian spirit. She had been insulted, mocked, and left for dead. But she had crawled home, not for revenge, but for the truth. And in doing so, she had earned something more valuable than medals or promotions. She had earned her place, forever.